Strike War Guide. A Guide to Winning and Losing Strike Wars in Omega Strikers by Piss Midas. Let's first establish what a Strike War is. This first clip is a Strike War. The space between the two strikers is relatively tight. The second clip is not a Strike War. Here, there is significantly more space in between the two players striking the ball back to each other. This second scenario is rather common, but is not the focus of this guide. A Strike War is a situation where two opposing strikers are on top or nearly on top of each other as the ball approaches them. Reaction time of players are only so fast, so both players have to deal with some level of uncertainty about what is about to occur as the ball is approaching. Part 1. Intro and Overview.
Why are we still here? Just to suffer? Every night, I can feel my...
This guide is mainly for beginner and intermediate players. Why I made this guide. I'm a coach for Omega Strikers and Strike Wars come up while I'm coaching. I usually say something short and brief, like do a vertical pass here instead of striking second. Upon reflection, I wanted to say more, but felt like it was a waste of time relative to how long of an explanation it requires. I think players have an intuitive understanding of a good choice or what a mistake in a given Strike War is, given enough time with the game. But here's a guide to accelerate through the trial and error required to become proficient in Strike Wars. As a small sneak peek, later on we will talk about microspacing, which has some nuances to it. But earlier on in the guide, we will talk about simpler foundational concepts. This is the sneak peek on microspacing. Part 2. Basic Concepts and Definitions. Reaction time. In 250 milliseconds, the ball can move this much at base speed when struck without awakenings that enhance force speed. The ball moves a tiny bit more than the diameter of a strike hitbox, which is the white circle drawn on top of Asher. In a Strike War, if you are reacting to someone striking, you might be too late. 200 to 250 milliseconds is considered a starting point for how fast a person can react with a single response to a single visual stimulus. Because the strike hitbox is only so large, consistently reacting to an opposing player's strike is difficult to do consistently, although size and speed awakenings can make this more possible. The main thing that I want to point out is that choices in Strike Wars are often predictive or conditionally reactive. The strike hitbox size. The strike hitbox is bigger than the circle at player's feet. Its diameter is nearly double. So this circle right here is what I'm referring to. And the core is a circle with a radius. It's not just an abstract point in space. It's recommended to have strike indicator turned off in your settings. Turning this off makes your strike come out a bit faster, which functionally reduces your reaction speed. Definitions. Strike window. The period of time a player can strike the ball. Striking early generally refers to striking early within the strike window. Striking late generally refers to striking later. A common action that players can do is walk with the ball to extend their strike window. Extending your strike window is an extra layer of ambiguity that strikers have to deal with. When there is more ambiguity on strike timing, it increases the difficulty of placing abilities on top of the ball, or even making striking second more difficult in the context of a Strike War. It's generally useful to extend your strike window in other contexts outside of a Strike War. Wiggling, moving back and forth. Velocity implies positioning, and wiggling implies different strike windows in the near future. Horizontal wiggling is ambiguous between striking early and striking late, but only covers a single angle. Vertical wiggling, good at being ambiguous at covering multiple angles. Sometimes wiggling is called fake striking, Wiggling does not have to occur in the context of a strike war, but it's most common in a strike war. Cross clear. In this guide, this term will mean striking the ball around enemies instead of forcing it through, specifically as a choice within a strike war. But in most other contexts, it means clearing the ball into open space. Out clear. A cross clear, but when a goalie or anchor striker does it. Ping pong refers to sending the ball back where it came from in the context of a strike war. Lead striker, the striker who is positioned to receive the ball first in a strike war. Anchor striker, the opposing striker, the striker who is positioned to receive the ball last, if at all. Here, the ball is traveling from left to right. The striker on the left, now, is the lead striker. The person on the right, Amy, is the anchor. The variables that matter in a strike war, loosely ordered from most to least important. First is the game state, where are all 6 players and the ball. Second, the angle width that each striker wants to push the ball towards, narrow or wide. And third, microspacing of the players in the strike war and the ball. Part 3. Angles of pushing the ball. Let's take a look at this strike war. The ball is moving from left to right. This is the angle that now the lead striker is interested in pushing the ball in. This is the angle that Zentaro, the anchor striker, is interested in pushing the ball in. The asymmetry here is largely due to the ranged characters Mako, Luna, and Estelle. Having to defend 2 barriers is also a factor. Even if Mako responds to Zentaro choosing the vertical option with an ability, the ball would go directly to Luna or Estelle. This noticeable discrepancy in angle width means it is easier for Zentaro to win this strike war, in addition to the fact that Nao is nearly staggered here and does not want to stand near the edge. In this next clip, the lead striker, Asher, just strikes early and does a cross clear. The anchor striker does not have agency to strike at all against this option. Asher's angle to push the ball is so wide that Estelle cannot respond to it with her strike. This is an example of a strike war that is so advantageous for Asher that people do not consider this a real strike war, but at a quick glance, it certainly resembles one. As demonstrated in the 2 previous clips we just watched, having the option to push the ball in a wider angle than the opposing striker is a considerable advantage. How wide of an angle a player has in a strike war depends on where all 6 players are. Not all strike wars are the same, and not all of them are fair. Definitions to describe angle width. Narrow. Forcing the ball through the opposing striker is the only option. For example, it's common to have to force the ball through the goalie to score. Wide. The opposing striker has to consider positioning themselves between 2 different angles. Sometimes instead of 2, it's 3, but this is pretty rare. To revisit this scenario, let's try to define what each side wants. Nao's angle to push the ball is narrow here. Zentaro's option to push the ball is wide here.
Who's that Pokemon? It's Jigglypuff!
Pop quiz. Using the terms narrow and wide, describe the angle that each striker wants to push the ball through in this strike war. So this is the strike war we want to look at. And let's describe X's angle and Asher's angle. So this is the angle that X is interested in pushing the ball in. And this is the angle that Asher wants to push the ball in. If we want it to be a bit more precise, then we should draw this angle on top of the ball. But let's ignore that for now. And the main thing I want to discuss here is whether this is considered narrow or wide. Okay, let's reveal the answer. Because of the size of Asher's hitbox, the angle that X has to push the ball through is narrow, because Asher can cover all of this without moving, although it's close. So even though the magnitude of the angle x wants to push the ball in looks large, it is narrow according to how we defined a narrow angle, which is that the opposing striker only has to stand in a single spot to cover all of the angles that the lead striker can push the ball in. We also discussed before how the ball has a width. It's not just a point in space. The angle that Asher wants to push the ball through can be described as wide. X could have been in one of two positions to cover Asher's options. X guesses correctly and strikes the ball. As a side note, Asher pushing the ball back into X is not an amazing reward, as there are 3 enemies in that hallway. So even though it's technically an option, it's not an amazing option. Revisiting wiggling. Horizontal wiggling makes strike window ambiguous and makes strike timing ambiguous. It can also widen the angles that a striker has. Walking away from the opposing striker makes it easier to do a cross clear and strike around the opponent. Either reduces the enemy's strike window or gets rid of it completely. Vertical wiggling is good at covering multiple angles that the enemy has. Ambiguity can trick the opponent into striking into you. This is worse at being ambiguous at strike timing. Microspacing of the players and the ball can massively change a striker from having a narrow angle to push the ball in one moment, then a fraction of a second later have a wide angle to push the ball, due to where the ball is or where their opposing striker has moved to. We will discuss microspacing in depth later. Part 4. Options in a strike war for each side. Let's talk about the options that each striker, the lead and the anchor, usually has in a strike war. These options are not equally viable in every strike war. There are usually only about 2-ish reasonable options in a given strike war. The main options for a lead striker to evaluate are A. Pushing the ball directly forward through the enemy striker. This is usually a high reward, but striking the ball through an enemy's character model is going to be less consistent than striking around them. Horizontal wiggling is a common idea for this, to make timing ambiguous or to extend the strike window. Here we can see that Red Rasmus slightly moved backwards to extend their strike window, and it was less about ambiguity and more about extending their own strike window. B. The cross clear, striking around the enemy striker. Just default to this option if that's where your teammate is, waiting for a pass. And oftentimes this is not a true strike war, as the anchor striker might not have an opportunity to strike at all, but this depends on microspacing. C. Vertical wiggling. This is useful when the opposing striker, the anchor, has a wide angle to push the ball. D. Using an ability. This is straightforward and oftentimes the default. Hit stun is a powerful tool. It's okay to trade a relatively low cooldown ability to try to force a win. E. Dribbling, but this is risky. Dribbling. Dribbling is technically an option, but it's relatively rare. Dribbling requires a striker to be sufficiently far enough away from a wall. Strike is a 0.9 second cooldown, which is a sizable window that can be punished by an ability. Most primaries in the game are low cooldown and responsive. A good time to dribble is when you have an ally directly behind you. Size and speed awakenings also help make dribbling possible and harder to punish. The main options for the anchor striker are strike early. This option is only good if you can threaten or nearly threaten walking past the lead striker and getting to the ball first. B. Strike late. Win the strike war by striking second. Move away from the enemy striker to reinforce this idea. Perform a cross clear or a pass to a teammate if appropriate, which also means denying or minimizing the opposing striker's strike window. But striking into the enemy is relatively common too. C. Wiggle horizontally. Be ambiguous between these two above options. They contrast each other well. D. Wiggling vertically. Trick the lead striker into striking into open space, then moving towards that option preemptively. This option is only relevant if the lead striker angle to push the ball is wide. It's not relevant if it's narrow. Some additional notes is that Skye had to haste here. Vertical wiggling, especially from an anchor striker, is rare. People tend to default to using an ability because the odds of an anchor striker winning this type of strike war, having to defend against a wide pushing angle, is so bad. Occasionally, this is possible to do without abilities, if you get some speed awakenings like stacks on stacks. E. Using an ability, last but definitely not least. Part 5. Microspacing. Sometimes people are stacked directly on top of each other, and sometimes people have some empty space in between them in a strike war. In this part of the guide, we will discuss 1. Movement in the lead up to the strike war, which impacts microspacing. 2. Viable options at different microspacings. And 3. Wiggling in relation to microspacing. General comments about moving away or moving towards the opposing striker. The lead striker moving towards the opponent. This option delays the strike war. Moving with the ball can create ambiguity because it increases their strike window. The lead striker moving away from the opponent. This option strengthens striking early for the cross clear. It is also good at delaying the strike and striking second. These underlying parts can be confusing. Despite one action being moving towards the opponent, and the other is moving away from the opponent, they have something in common in that it's a good way to delay a strike war, or delaying the strike in order to strike second. These are both true. The asterisk here is meant to convey that, technically speaking, the anchor striker is not forced to strike the ball back into the lead striker's character model. Here are some depictions that illustrate this concept. While the ball is moving towards the strike war, the lead striker moving into the opponent does delay the strike war. Once the anchor striker strikes, the ball may or may not move towards the lead striker. If the ball goes towards the lead striker, then moving away does help them strike second. But if the ball does not go into the direction they started to move into, it can be hard or impossible to strike second. The anchor striker moving towards the opponent. This option is good at threatening to walk past the opponent, get to the ball first and strike early. The anchor striker moving away from the opponent. This option is good for striking second, and or the option to get a cross clear. This can be a pass to a teammate, much like a goalie would perform an out clear. The other benefit of moving backwards is that moving away from the opponent is also good if the enemy uses an ability. Most abilities push the ball forward, and traveling where the ball is going extends your strike window. This is the sneak peek we've seen before. For these images, we will assume that the ball is moving from left to right, and you'll have to use your imagination for the stick drawings. Earlier, I mentioned that there are usually only about 2, give or take, viable options for each striker. We will now discuss the options available to each striker at different microspacings and when the ball is at different places. This may seem like a lot of information, but the difficulty comes from having a short time frame to make a decision. I will call the images on the left a loose strike war, and the images on the right a claustrophobic strike war. At this spacing, the lead striker can do a cross clear if appropriate, walk towards Amy and try to strike second, or use an ability to try to force the ball past Amy. So this is the same spacing, but Amy has the ball. Depending on the scenario, Amy can do a cross clear or an out clear. This option is likely the strongest, and if the map geometry wasn't there, then this would be more consistent. This angle is wide. Now we'll have trouble contesting both of these options at the same time. And there is some moderate timing ambiguity here as well. Will Amy strike when the ball is in front of her, or let the ball past her? And so this moderate timing variation, combined with this wide angle, means that Amy's options to win the strike war are pretty diverse. So for this scenario, the spacing is more claustrophobic, and the ball is on top of now. Here, the anchor striker, Amy, has a stronger option of striking early. And depending on spacing, this is tight or moderate window for now to strike second. And this is the window that now would have to strike second if Amy strikes early. Amy also has the option to execute an outclear, and depending on the spacing, now might not have the agency to contest this. So between striking early and an outclear, these options contrast each other quite well, and now can only realistically contest one and not both options at the same time. And sometimes Amy can walk away and still ping-pong it back towards now, which she might be interested in if an ally can follow up on the ball with an ability to shove the ball to score, or for her own scoring opportunity. So this is the same spacing as we just saw, but the ball has traveled a little bit further. At this spacing, now has good agency to strike second. It's not 100% confirmed, as there is still a little bit of ambiguity, as Amy has two angles she can strike the ball towards. In the previous slides, we treated this as a wide angle, but if now is on top of the ball more, this means she has agency to contest most of these angles without moving too much. And there is a minimal amount of timing ambiguity. Amy can strike the ball early, or let the ball travel a bit more, which will give the lead striker a slight amount of trouble. And this one would require Amy to walk backwards a bit. Here's a summary of the different microspacings. Of course, it's a spectrum. There are many outcomes in between. And depending on where the ball is, or math geometry, it's possible for the opposing striker to be able to simultaneously be able to cover all strike placements and have good agency to strike second. In the previous slides, it was implied that you could either value striking second or value covering a vertical option, but depending on how wide of an angle each side wants to push the ball in, that doesn't have to be a compromise. In reality, now's cross clear is not a viable option. This is just where an enemy Zentaro is, and if not, Estelle or Amy can punish such a play. So now's only focus is to force the ball through to Asher, and Amy would like to cross clear to Zentaro, but it's not super consistent due to map geometry. It likely has to go through now's character model. That is to say, in the previous slides, we took creative liberties about this screenshot. Amy delays her strike and gets the pass to Zentaro, but the ball has to travel through now's character model. Now did a moderately late strike timing, but Amy delays her strike even more. Now wiggles vertically, but it's rather subtle. It's either an attempt to bait out Amy into passing vertically or an attempt to be on top of the ball a bit more. Amy does end up going for the pass, but it looks like now anticipated an earlier strike timing. The relationship between wiggling and strike timings, from the perspective of the lead striker, moving away from the anchor striker increases the viability of striking early and striking around the opponent, the cross clear. This is especially useful when the anchor striker attempts to move in, and they themselves are trying to get past the lead striker to get to the ball first and strike the ball early. Let's look at this clip that features horizontal wiggling. Kazan is the lead striker, and Amy is the anchor striker. First, let's talk about what angles each striker wants to push the ball in. Kazan's angle is narrow, and Amy's angle is wide, as passing to her teammate is viable. Something to note is that Kazan and Nao are shorter range characters. In the lead up to the strike war, Amy walks towards Kazan. This threatens striking early, and depending on the microspacing, Kazan's window to strike second is either incredibly tight or impossible. As a response to this movement, Kazan walks away in order to retain his agency to strike second. Amy walks away. Amy has horizontally wiggled. Amy then performs a vertical pass to her teammate and out clear. If Kazan was playing a different character with a circular strike hitbox, then he should move south to cut off Amy's pass to her teammate. But because his strike hitbox is long, he still does a good job at contesting what Amy ends up doing, but just ever so slightly loses the interaction. Amy barely wins the interaction, which is mechanically impressive. Who has the advantage in a strike war? Ability usage has not been mentioned much, but they are incredibly common in strike war scenarios. People will often use an ability if they are in a disadvantage within the context of a strike war. The following factors generally give people an advantage in a strike war. 1. Being the striker that is able to push the ball in a wider angle. 2. Being the lead striker. The anchor striker is forced to strike first, or else the ball zooms past them, and then the lead striker strikes second. 3rd, microspacing. If you don't like the odds you have in a strike war, consider using an ability. People will also use an ability in a strike war if it is a sufficiently high reward, such as gaining space, an opportunity to shove the ball, a barrier, or a goal. Most primaries in the game have a cooldown of about 10 seconds, which is relatively low. Part 6. Analysis. Let's dive deep into some clips using the vocabulary and tools we've discussed. Let's dip our toes with a clip we've already looked at, the strike war between Asher and Estelle. First, let's establish what angle each striker wants to push the ball in. Estelle's is narrow. Asher's is wide, although forcing it through Estelle is not a good reward. Even if Asher did force the ball past Estelle, there is no player on blue team who can effectively follow up on it. Asher's effective range is short, especially with Estelle on top of her. Asher's dash and special will be body blocked by Estelle. Nao and Mako's effective range is roughly here, and that means they wouldn't be able to follow up on the ball in front of Luna. But on the other hand, this cross clear from Asher is protected. If Estelle or Luna tries to react and intercepts the cross clear with an ability, the ball would be pushed into Mako and Nao. Estelle doesn't have agency to strike second at all against the option that Asher selected, even with the microspacing in the strike war being relatively tight. It looks odd that Estelle voluntarily walks backwards in the lead up to the strike war and forfeits her agency to strike. Estelle is moving erratically because she is respecting Asher's kill combo. Dash and core flip are abilities that are impossible to react to. It looks like Estelle is wiggling horizontally, much like the clip we saw before on Oni Village between Amy and Kazan. In that clip, we saw Amy wiggle horizontally, and it created space for her to execute an out clear. This time, Asher does not behave as expected. As a side note, it can be relevant to wiggle here in relation to Nao having the ball. The further back Estelle stands, it gives Estelle a larger window for her to place an ability if Nao or Mako forces an out clear. Estelle walking forward would be a tighter window for Estelle to land an ability on Nao's out clear. But it's great if Nao ping-pongs the ball back into the corner. Unfortunately for Estelle, this option is too close to the wall. So technically this dynamic exists relative to Nao's options, and Estelle wiggling can encourage or discourage Nao to ping-pong the ball back into the corner or force an out clear. But it's not as important as the dynamic of Asher threatening to kill here. Let's take a look at this strike war between Skye and Nao. Skye is interested in pushing the ball in this narrow angle. Nao's is wide. Let's revisit these explanations from before. The left images apply, as this strike war features loose spacing. When the ball is still on top of Skye, we can see that the image in the top left resembles the clip we are analyzing. At this spacing, we noted before that the lead striker will have an advantage because they can cross clear. But Skye did not have access to this option due to the map's geometry, as well as Amy with eject button. So this doesn't quite apply. Because of this, Skye's main option is to win the strike war by striking second. A fraction of a second later, the ball travels and is on the anchor striker. This resembles the image in the bottom left of the screen. The anchor striker at this spacing can either vertically pass or ping-pong the ball back. In this clip, Skye identifies that the spacing is disadvantageous and uses his dash to make up for it. Skye walks forward. If we imagine where he would be in a quarter of a second, then he would be covering the vertical pass to Rasmus. Skye does a stutter step here, which is functionally similar to wiggling. He is anticipating Now to strike early. Not only does Now have an advantage in the strike war due to having a wider angle, but she also successfully utilizes her unusually large strike window to wait to see if Skye commits to an option. Skye's decision to commit to the corner would also do well if Now uses abilities in this strike war. Now using abilities would push the ball back into the corner, which is the area where Skye commits to protect. Skye's movement was ambiguous, but Now leveraged her advantages well. Next, let's analyze this strike war between Skye and Era while paying attention to the lead up to the strike war. First, Era walks towards Skye with Night Market's speed gate. Second, Era walks away, protecting the wall. Era is anticipating a strike in this direction and gives herself a larger window to strike second. Combined with the previous movement, this is a horizontal wiggle. Third, Era walks south to cover the direct pass to Kazan. This is effectively a vertical wiggle. So these two images are a third of a second apart. In the bottom image, Kazan can almost strike. Earlier, I mentioned that visual reaction speed is about 200 milliseconds. But when a person has to respond to multiple different stimuli with multiple different reactions, their reaction speed is slower. At the more extreme end, a person's reaction time can go over 500 milliseconds. It's trivial to state that Era should have simply struck here, but given that she juggled multiple ideas in succession, implies that her cognitive load is quite high. Reaction speed is a somewhat nebulous topic that can have variance between different scenarios and from person to person. The only way to know if a situation is reactable is by trying the scenario out yourself. Rewinding a bit, around the time when Era was still walking towards Skye could have dribbled. With Mako right behind him, it's relatively low risk as a choice with the upside of escorting the ball forward. If Era had primary, then she could punish Skye dribbling for a modest reward of pushing the ball into the corner, as well as shrinking and slowing Skye for the next interaction. However, at this moment, Era's primary is still on cooldown. Given that Era does not have a good way to punish this dribble, it's likely that Era was anticipating a dribble and was giving up space with that in mind. This would be a relevant reason for why Era does not react in time to the pass to Kazan. Here is a strike war between Zentaro and Era. The microspacing is incredibly tight. It's hard to say who is slightly ahead of who, even when pausing the clip. This is the angle Zentaro wants to push the ball in. With this Arenado here, it's not clear whether he should want to put the ball up here, such as a pass to his ally Rasmus. Even without this tornado, these passes are risky in front of ranged characters, and this is a substantial amount of space to gain for red team. This is Era's angle. It's possible that Era wants to put the ball in this top lane, but given the direction that we see the tornado angle, it's rather weak. If it was angled differently, then it would be more viable. Era giving the ball to her ally Rasmus is a strong option, especially because of their core flip. Looking at Zentaro's angle, we should define this as wide, as there are roughly 3-ish distinct angles that Zentaro can push the ball in, although some of these angles are valid to dismiss. But the microspacing is claustrophobically tight in this strike war, which better fits how we defined a narrow angle. It's hard to definitively say whether this is a narrow or wide angle. This is an instance where the vocab we've used before doesn't perfectly fit the situation. This is an unusual edge case, but the underlying concepts and basic options we've gone over still apply. Zentaro outmuscles his opponent in the strike war by striking second in an incredibly tight window, but he had other options that would give Era a small or non-existent strike window, such as a pass to his ally Rasmus, a dribble, or putting the ball into this corner. But as we just mentioned, the pass to Rasmus is reasonable to dismiss because of the tornado still forming. Zentaro ends up dribbling, but this idea would still be consistent, and arguably more consistent if he struck an imperceptible fraction of a second earlier, while walking away. Both players have slick kicks, and denying the opportunity for the opposing striker to proc the move speed would be extra icing on the cake. Alternatively, if Zentaro wants to strike second to force a win, he should put the ball into this corner of the net. It's possible Era delayed her strike by just a smidge. Having looked at the clip frame by frame, it's hard to definitively state this, as the network code of multiplayer games can obfuscate what is happening when scrutinizing this interaction. But Era striking a bit late is somewhat reasonable because when the ball floats to the strike war, it's a moderately short pass. Between striking early and striking late, striking early can demand a noticeably faster reaction speed. Even still, it's impressive that Zentaro strikes second here. For this next analysis, let's look at 3 clips from the same match on Clarion Test Chamber instead of focusing on a single interaction. In this first clip, Kazan walks past Juliet. He forgoes strike warring in this tight hallway. Juliet has Adrenaline Rush, and Kazan is respecting her dash punch combo. With this context, it's a good call to not strike war Juliet near the edge of the map. This second clip is what can happen if a player attempts to participate in a strike war near Juliet. It can seem like Juliet is an untouchable character, but with a longer term view of the game, this is still playable for Blue Team. In this third clip, we see Blue Team respecting Juliet and giving her space. Giving up this amount of space quickly leads to losing a barrier. But as Juliet moves around the map, she is peppered with abilities. Sensing that she's on a timer to do something while she still has some health, Juliet attempts a desperate play by dash punching now. It does an okay job at pushing the ball forward, but it's an expensive commitment and doesn't get a kill. For the rest of the clip, Juliet is shepherded into her side of the map. Red Team effectively has to play a 2v3 due to Juliet's low health. These clips are meant to show that there are situations where strike wars should not be taken in the first place. Next, let's look at the strike war between Kai and X. Kai is the lead striker. The angle Kai is interested in pushing the ball in is narrow. And this is X's angle. It is wide, with a vertical pass to Era as an option. In the lead up to the strike war, the microspacing is somewhere in between claustrophobic and loose, and the spacing between the lead up and the actual strike war remained relatively consistent, although that's not always guaranteed. X's main options are to get to the ball first and strike early. His other option is to walk away and execute an out clear to pass to Era. Kai's only option is to try to force the ball through by striking second. To win this interaction with just a strike, Kai has to guess where the ball will be struck in this sort of window. If X extends his strike window by walking away, then Kai will not even be able to contest this pass with just his strike because the ball moves significantly faster than players. Kai can also move vertically north to try to cover the pass to Era, but then X will have an easier time forcing the ball past Kai. This option for Kai is not consistent because depending on what the microspacing will be in about a quarter of a second, it's questionable if Kai can even strike the ball. Alternatively, Kai can use an ability if he doesn't like his odds to win this strike war. It looks like X misjudged the microspacing and thought that walking into Kai and striking early was more viable than it actually is, which is a somewhat reasonable evaluation to make in the heat of the moment. It's also possible that X is respecting Kazan and Kazan's hook, which can be relevant. Let's take a look at this sequence on Aten City, where Octavia opts to dribble in multiple interactions. Before, it was mentioned that dribbling is rare to make as a choice in a strike war, and it's rare because strike is a 0.9 second cooldown. This is a sizable window for an enemy to throw an ability out and gain space. Dribbling is a viable option here because Octavia has her teammates directly behind her. If Blue Team throws an ability out, then it's an inefficient trade of an ability for Zentaro's strike, for little to no space. There are many abilities in the game that can push the ball forward, but abilities that can pull the ball are uncommon. Estelle recognizes that this is an opportunity for Octavia to dribble, and does not strike at all. This is a good choice against dribbling, and eventually, Estelle is positioned so that she can strike the ball while Octavia's strike is still on cooldown. If Octavia puts the ball over here, that's where Amy is, so this would be a weak choice. If Octavia puts the ball here, this is where Kai is. Estelle is content not attempting to strike multiple times because of these spots where Octavia can push the ball, Estelle's teammates can handle. If Octopia pushes towards this corner, then there are very few abilities that can follow up on it in an attempt to score. Perhaps Zentaro, if he had 2 Dash Awakenings, can do something productive, or an Octopia primary at max range. But it's also relevant that with an Estelle on top of her, the Octopia primary will be less effective, turning into a light hit instead of a normal hit. It's still a decent idea for Octopia to push the ball into this corner, either now or eventually, but the main thing I want to point out here is that this scenario is still playable from blue team's perspective, especially with Estelle responsibly contesting Octavia's dribble. Overall, Octopia and Estelle both have good awareness of where their teammates are in this sequence. We are nearing the end of the guide, and what a ride it's been. Having made this guide, the framework from these concepts has made it easier and quicker for me to spot my own mistakes when playing or reviewing my own gameplay. It's also helped me when I'm coaching students in Omega Strikers and describing the differences between multiple Strike Wars. It's easy to hyper-focus on striking second in Strike Wars and pushing the ball directly forward. Although it's a fundamental option that will get you far, when you are a hammer, everything is a nail. But if you are looking at the entire screen properly, strike second and push the ball forward can hold you back if it's the only option you pick. Being able to evaluate this scenario and keep track of all 6 players are the most important aspects of Strike Wars. Making this evaluation while simultaneously responding to the minutiae is a lot to keep track of. Being unable to track where all 6 players are at a given time is a common deficiency, and this deficiency makes it harder for players to notice mechanical mistakes in a Strike War. The ability to track where everyone is at all times is a vitally important skill in this game. Strike Wars are incredibly quick. If you think too hard, that will slow down your reaction speed. The eventual goal should be to make decisions fast, effortlessly, and intuitively. Okay, good luck. Flourish with this knowledge. The sky's the limit, and I'll see you in my raid games.